A crow is watching you right now, and it already knows your face. Not your species, not your silhouette, your face, the actual arrangement of your eyes, your nose, your mouth, stored in a memory system built to last that bird for decades. Somewhere in a parking lot, a park, a rooftop, a crow you've never noticed is filing you away in a folder labeled either safe or threat. And once that folder is created, it does not get deleted. It gets shared with other crows, crows that have never even met you. You've spent your whole life assuming you were the observer, the one doing the watching, the studying, the naming. Humans built zoos, wildlife documentaries, entire scientific disciplines around the idea that we look at animals and animals simply exist to be looked at. But somewhere behind that assumption is a much stranger, much more uncomfortable fact. You are being watched back. Constantly. Assessed, categorized, remembered by species you'd never suspect of paying attention to you at all. And the way they see you isn't what you think. This isn't a story about animals loving us, fearing us, or serving us, the three boxes we usually shove them into. It's a story about what happens when you strip away the human ego from the equation and ask a colder, more clinical question. Biologically, chemically, neurologically, what actually happens inside an animal's brain when you walk into a room? The answer involves stress hormones, facial recognition circuits older than language, entire ecosystems that have quietly reorganized themselves around your shadow, and at least one case where an animal's perception of humans became so accurate, so specific, that it terrified the scientists studying it. By the end of this, you will not be able to walk past a pigeon, a dog, or your own reflection the same way again. Let's start with the crows, because the crows are where this whole unsettling idea first got proven in a laboratory, and where it stopped being folklore and became something you have to take seriously. In 2006, on the campus of the University of Washington, a wildlife biologist named John Marsluff did something almost petty in its simplicity. He and his team put on rubber caveman masks, an ugly, generic, slightly menacing face, and trapped a small number of wild crows on campus. Just trapped them, measured them, released them. No harm done, but definitely a bad afternoon for the crows. Here's where it stops being petty. Marsluff's team then walked around campus in that same mask, doing nothing threatening at all. No traps, no nets, just walking. And the crows scolded them, dive-bombed them, screamed alarm calls the second the mask appeared, from up to 100 meters away, sometimes recruiting other crows to join the mobbing. Take the mask off, put on a different, neutral mask, and the aggression vanished instantly. The crows weren't reacting to a stranger. They were reacting to that stranger. But here's what researchers actually found next, and this is the part that turns a fun experiment into something closer to horror. They kept wearing the dangerous mask around campus, on and off, for years. Not months, years. And the hostility didn't fade. It spread. Crows that had never been trapped, never even been alive during the original 2006 incident, began scolding the mask on sight. The behavior was being taught, bird to bird, generation to generation, faster and further than any single crow could have witnessed the original event. Sit with that for a second. A crow can hold a grudge against a human face for over a decade, and then teach that grudge to its children, who teach it to theirs, until an entire population of birds that never met you personally still knows to hate your face on sight. Somewhere on that campus, there are crows alive today who have never seen Marsluff in person, reacting with alarm to a face their grandparents warned them about. You've probably walked past a bird today and thought nothing of it. Somewhere, a bird may have thought something very specific about you. And this is where the story stops being about crows and starts being about a category of animal behavior you've never had a reason to think about. The idea that entire species have developed specialized cognitive tools whose only job is reading humans, and that those tools are quietly running in the background of your daily life more than you have ever realized. Here's the reframe, the moment where what you assumed about this topic gets flipped, and it's the reason the rest of this story matters. You've probably grown up thinking of animal perception as a downgrade of human perception, simpler senses, dumber processing, a blurrier, dumber version of what you experience. A dog sees you, sure, but in some reduced, instinct-driven, food-motivated way. Lesser, filtered. That assumption is not just incomplete. In several documented cases, it's backwards. Consider the dog for a second, not as a pet, but as the single most successful biological experiment in reading humans that has ever existed on Earth. Somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, a population of wolves began a slow, silent negotiation with human campfires. The wolves that could tolerate human proximity, and more specifically, the wolves that could read human intention without being taught, got the scraps, got the warmth, got to survive. Every subsequent generation was, whether anyone intended it or not, being bred for one specific talent, understanding what a human is about to do before the human finishes deciding to do it. The result, tens of thousands of years later, is a species that can read a pointed finger. That sounds small until you realize almost no other animal on Earth can do that reliably. Not chimpanzees, our closest genetic relatives, not wolves, dogs' own direct ancestors. Point at one of two identical containers, and a dog will walk straight to the one you indicated. First try, no training required, sometimes as young as 6 weeks old. A chimp, given the same test, usually just stares at the container. Stares at your hand. Doesn't get it. The dog, evolutionarily engineered across millennia specifically to decode humans, gets it instantly. But here's what researchers actually found buried underneath that party trick. And it's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. Dogs don't just read your finger. They read your face, and they read it with a level of nuance that mirrors how dogs read other dogs, not how any other species reads a human. Brain imaging studies on domestic dogs have found dedicated neural regions that light up specifically in response to human faces, processing them the way social primates process the faces of their own kind. Your dog isn't looking at a big, strange, hairless creature and pattern matching it to predator or prey. Your dog has, over thousands of years of selective pressure, developed something close to a specialized human reading organ inside its skull. And it goes further than faces. Dogs can smell the change in your body chemistry when your blood sugar drops, when your cortisol spikes, when you're about to have a seizure minutes before it happens. Cases so well documented that medical alert dogs are now a formally trained category of service animal. Somewhere in your own home, if you have a dog, there is a creature capable of detecting a medical emergency in your body before your own nervous system has finished registering it. Now here's the modern-day gut punch. The moment this stops being a story about wolves around an ancient campfire and lands directly in your living room. Every time you come home and your dog reads your face at the door, happy, exhausted, angry, grieving, before you've said a single word, you are being read by an animal whose entire evolutionary purpose, quite literally, is understanding you specifically. That is not a metaphor. That is 20,000 years of selective breeding pointed directly at your face. Right now, tonight, when you walk through your own front door. Which raises an uncomfortable question you've probably never asked yourself. If a dog can read your face that precisely, how much of what you consider private, your mood, your stress, your health, is actually broadcasting constantly to an audience you didn't know was watching? Let's widen the lens, because dogs and crows are just the beginning of a pattern that runs far deeper into the animal kingdom than anyone expected. And this is where the story gets genuinely strange. In 2007, in a national park in South Africa, researchers studying wild elephants ran an experiment on fear itself. They played recordings of human voices to elephant families through hidden speakers, some voices belonging to Maasai men, a group with a documented history of occasionally killing elephants over cattle disputes, and others belonging to Kamba men, an ethnic group with essentially no history of hunting elephants at all. Same forest, same elephants, same volume, different voices. The elephants didn't just react to human. They reacted to which human? Upon hearing Maasai voices, the elephant families bunched together defensively, sniffed the air, and began retreating. A textbook threat response. Upon hearing Kamba voices, saying the exact same words, the elephants barely reacted at all. The elephants weren't just detecting the presence of a predator species. They were parsing accent, tone, and vocal characteristics well enough to distinguish between two human ethnic groups they had almost certainly never been formally taught to distinguish. But here's what researchers actually found that made the story spread through scientific circles like wildfire. The elephants could even tell the difference between adult male voices and voices of women and children within the same dangerous group, and reacted with far less alarm to the non-adult male voices, because historically, in that specific region, it's adult Maasai men who carry spears. The elephants had built a threat model with a resolution fine enough to separate not just species, not just ethnicity, but age and gender of the specific human speaking, based purely on sound. Think about what that actually requires biologically. An elephant brain, an organ shaped by millions of years of evolution to navigate savanna ecosystems, remember water sources across decades, and maintain complex multigenerational social bonds, has, within a relatively short evolutionary window, repurposed some of that immense cognitive machinery specifically to model human behavior with almost surgical precision. Not humans are dangerous. Something closer to a live, updating threat assessment database sorted by voice. And it isn't only elephants. It isn't only crows. It isn't only dogs. Around the world, independently, in species that share no recent common ancestor and no shared culture, the same pattern keeps re-emerging. Wherever humans have become a significant force in an animal's environment, that animal's brain has begun building dedicated tools to read us. Not generically, specifically. Here's a modern connection you won't be able to unsee once you notice it. Every single security camera, every doorbell camera, every smart speaker sitting quietly in the corner of your kitchen. Humans built an entire industry worth tens of billions of dollars around exactly one function. Passively watching, listening, and remembering human behavior in granular detail, and quietly categorizing who is a threat and who isn't. We built that industry out of glass, silicon, and cloud storage. Elephants built the same system out of sound waves and neurons, for free over evolutionary time because they had no other choice. You didn't invent surveillance. You just industrialized something several species had already been doing to you. That thought alone should make you a little uneasy. But it's about to get worse because so far everything you've heard has been about animals reading humans as a group, as a category, as a threat level. What's coming next is about animals reading you as an individual, and it involves an animal you've probably never respected in your entire life. Pigeons. Yes, pigeons. The bird you've mentally filed under flying rat. The bird that seems too dumb, too twitchy, too ordinary to be capable of anything sophisticated. Here's what researchers actually found buried in a completely unglamorous study, one that never went viral, one you've almost certainly never heard of. Pigeons can recognize individual human faces with a success rate that rivals primates, and they can do it well enough to remember specific people who were unkind to them versus specific people who fed them, sometimes recognizing the exact same person again after gaps of months, in different clothing, in different locations, out of context. In one study conducted in a public park, researchers had two different people, one who consistently fed the pigeons, one who consistently chased them away, walked the same route repeatedly. Within days, the pigeons began altering their behavior before either person got close enough to feed or chase them, approaching the feeder and avoiding the chaser at a distance, based on face and gait alone. When the two people switched clothing to control for that variable, the pigeons weren't fooled. They were tracking the person, not the outfit. That means somewhere in a city park near you right now, there might be a pigeon quietly keeping a mental list of exactly which humans are safe and which ones aren't. A list built entirely from your face, updated in real time that you will never know exists. What you're about to hear now was, for a long time, the part of the story that got buried not through conspiracy, but through sheer human reluctance to accept it, because it undermines something we've quietly believed about ourselves since the beginning of recorded history. That we are the ones doing the observing, the categorizing, the understanding, while the rest of the animal kingdom simply exists as a backdrop to human perception. For most of scientific history, animal cognition research was built almost entirely around a single question: what can animals learn to do for us? Feats of memory, obedience, tool use, all measured against a human yardstick. Almost nobody was asking the inverse question: what have animals already learned about us without being taught purely by watching? When researchers finally started asking that question seriously, starting in earnest only in the last 2 or 3 decades, the data that came back didn't just add a footnote to animal cognition science. It rewrote a working assumption that had gone essentially unchallenged since Aristotle first tried to rank species by intelligence. The assumption that perception flows in one direction, from the smart species down to the simple ones. What actually flows, the data suggests, is closer to a two-way surveillance system that's been running quietly in the background of human civilization the entire time, one we simply never had the tools or the humility to notice. Consider how differently we'd behave if we'd known this the whole time. If every gesture toward a wild animal, every tone of voice, every unconscious flinch was being logged somewhere, not by a person, not by a government, but by the animal itself, folded into its own private model of what your species means, updated and passed down like folklore between crows, encoded into flight distance in pigeons, hardwired into threat calibration in elephants, would you have walked through the world the same way? There's a term researchers sometimes use, almost apologetically, for how badly humans have underestimated this, the sensory bias, a built-in assumption that intelligence must look and feel the way human intelligence looks and feels, wrapped in language, wrapped in tools, wrapped in things we can measure on our terms. It quietly filtered decades of research, and it meant thousands of cases of animals demonstrating sophisticated human tracking behavior were logged, briefly noted, and shelved as anecdotal curiosities rather than what they actually were. Evidence of an entire hidden dimension of the natural world, one where you are not the observer. You are the observed. And here's a modern-day version of that same blind spot, playing out in your own life right now. You've probably never once considered what your neighborhood dogs, not your dog, other people's dogs, the ones behind fences you pass on your daily walk, actually know about your daily routine. What time you leave for work. Whether you're the person who always crosses the street to avoid them or the person who always stops to say hello. Whether your gait changed after an injury. Whether your voice got quieter after a hard year. Dogs build models of individual humans in their neighborhood with a level of granular personal detail that most of us assume only a close human friend would notice. And yet you've probably never spent one conscious second wondering what that dog thinks it knows about you. Now for the part of this story that changes everything, the reveal researchers themselves didn't see coming, the one that turns this from animals are more perceptive than we thought into something closer to unsettling. It starts with an animal you've probably never even considered capable of watching you back. The fish. In 2016, a study on archerfish, small tropical fish famous for spitting jets of water to knock insects off overhanging branches, set out to answer a wildly counterintuitive question. Could a fish, an animal separated from humans by roughly 450 million years of evolutionary distance, whose brain architecture is fundamentally alien to ours, learn to recognize individual human faces? The expectation going in, even among the researchers, was some version of no, or at best, a very shaky, error-prone version of yes. Fish don't have a neocortex. Fish don't process faces the way primates do. Fish, by almost every assumption baked into comparative neuroscience, shouldn't have the hardware for this at all. But here's what researchers actually found, and it's the kind of result that makes an entire field quietly go back and rewrite its assumptions. The archerfish learned to distinguish between two human faces with over 80% accuracy on the first attempt, and with training pushed that accuracy above 90%. Even when the faces were shown from different angles in grayscale with lighting changed, variables specifically designed to trip up simple pattern matching. A fish, whose brain last shared a common ancestor with yours before land animals even existed, learned to tell two human strangers apart at a rate that rivals some primates. Let that detonate for a second. There is no evolutionary reason a fish should be able to do that. Archerfish never evolved alongside humans the way dogs, crows, or elephants did. There was no 10,000-year negotiation at a campfire, no shared ecosystem pressure forcing them to develop a human reading toolkit. And yet, when researchers handed them the raw sensory problem, distinguish the specific human primate face from that one, their brains, architecturally alien to ours in almost every way, solved it anyway. What that suggests is something far stranger than some animals are good at reading. Humans. It suggests that facial recognition at some basic computational level might not require the specialized human or primate machinery scientists assumed it did, that almost any sufficiently complex brain, given enough visual data and enough incentive, can bootstrap its way into recognizing you specifically the way it recognizes a landmark, a predator, or a food source. Which means the assumption that being seen individually requires a brain built like ours might be one of the more quietly arrogant mistakes in the history of biology. And if a fish with no evolutionary relationship to humans whatsoever can learn your face after a handful of training sessions, how many other species right now, today, walking or swimming or flying past you in daily life, are already doing this quietly without anyone ever running the experiment to notice? That's the disturbing part. Not that animals can see us, we sort of already suspected that. The disturbing part is how casually, how cheaply, how automatically that ability seems to switch on across the animal kingdom the second there's a reason to use it. It isn't some rare evolutionary miracle limited to a handful of brainy species that bonded with us over millennia. It might be closer to a default setting, a capability most complex nervous systems already have loaded, just waiting for a reason to point it at you. Which brings us to the coldest, strangest fact in this entire story. The one usually left out of the feel-good version of animals are smarter than we think content, because it isn't heartwarming at all. Being individually recognized by an animal isn't inherently good news for you. In several well-documented predator species, certain sharks, certain big cats in regions with high human contact, researchers have found evidence that individual predators can learn to associate specific human behaviors, specific locations, even specific boats or vehicles with easy prey, adjusting their hunting patterns around individual humans who've become predictable. The same cognitive machinery that lets a crow recognize your face to avoid you can, in a different species under different pressures, recognize your face to target you. Recognition isn't affection. Recognition is just information, and information, in nature, gets used however it's useful. So here's where that leaves you walking back out into the world after watching this. Every crow on your street corner has already run a background check on your face, whether you know it or not. Every dog you've ever met has been quietly reading your body chemistry and your emotional state with tools shaped by 20,000 years of pointed selection at exactly that task. Every pigeon in every park has, in all likelihood, already sorted you into safe or not worth the risk, based on nothing but the way you walk. And somewhere in the ocean, a fish with a brain unlike anything in your own skull has proven that this ability, the ability to single you out, remember you, and act differently because of it, might not even require the kind of intelligence we've spent centuries assuming it did. You built cameras, facial recognition software, entire industries dedicated to identifying individual humans out of a crowd, and it turns out nature quietly built the exact same technology out of neurons instead of silicon in creatures we never thought to check. The next time you walk past a bird that doesn't fly away, or a dog that tilts its head at exactly the right moment, or you feel that strange, prickling sense of being watched somewhere wild and empty, you might not be imagining it. You might, for once in your species' long history of assuming it does the watching, actually be right.